everyone for joining. We're going to have a conversation between myself, I'm Dan, and Yorke. Maybe we can just start off. Yorke, you can explain a little bit about what you do and how you ended up in this role.
Sure. Yorke Rhodes from Microsoft. Going back to 2015, actually co-founded our blockchain work here at Microsoft. And I'm a principal program manager in the blockchain engineering team, looking after our products, product market fit, et cetera, et cetera. Sorry, Dan. And how about you? How'd you get to where you are?
So my role right now is lead for Consensus Protocol Business Unit. So we're a team of around 60 people focused exclusively on Ethereum protocols. That's everything from ETH1, Enterprise Ethereum, and ETH2 as well. I've been with Consensus for almost 3 years now. It's crazy how time flies.
Yeah, amazing.
So in the summer of 2017, we decided to spin up the group, and I was brought in to scale it and took it from 2 people at the time to where we are now. It's been quite the journey.
Amazing, amazing. I think we're going to basically weave into, some of the product announcements, but I'm curious, I think, our backgrounds sort of cross some of the same interesting patterns. I know you spent some time in Africa. What were you doing there?
Yeah, so when I graduated college in a different lifetime, I had this massive delusion that I wanted to go into academia. And so I got a job working for a research lab, an economics research lab at MIT called the Poverty Action Lab, which tries to figure out what's effective and what's not effective when you're trying to make a difference. Because unfortunately, so many of the efforts that we try don't actually improve the lives of those that we're trying to improve.
Yeah.
And so they sent me first to live in West Africa and then East Africa to study the adoption of new technologies. In West Africa, I was studying agricultural technologies, which has absolutely no bearing on this conversation. But in East Africa, I was studying the adoption of mobile technologies. And I was there right when M-Pesa had kind of become ubiquitous, their mobile money platform, and people were just starting to experiment with Bitcoin. It had just arrived on the scene. Local Bitcoins is a big thing. There were the early conversations about founding BitPesa and all the companies that came. So it was a really exciting time in the East African tech community, and people sort of saw the potential immediately to connect the East African tech hub to the broader world through blockchain technologies. And so I started exploring it at the time and increasingly got more and more excited. And then after one of my startups failed, which was in the AI space, I was thinking about what I wanted to do next, and my wife basically looked at me and said, "All you do is talk about Ethereum. You should go work at Ethereum." and so I started knocking on doors and found Consensus.
That's awesome. That's awesome. The thing that I always ask in the context of whether it's enterprise Ethereum or social impact usage of technologies, it's what has to be true, right, in order for the technology to actually make a difference to the people it serves. And so this actually is a very helpful framing. Again, whether you ask that question about, what has to be true for enterprises to use something like public mainnet, or what has to be true for, technology to make a difference in a social impact case, which, is directly impacting people's lives.
And so, how did you end up in blockchain at Microsoft? Because your path took you through a bunch of interesting fields as well.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I was, my history is probably a little bit longer than yours, just based on the color of our hair. But the path was an interesting one. I mean, I was actually at the time teaching. When I discovered blockchain or had my journey into blockchain, I was actually teaching a course that I had developed at NYU, essentially called Entrepreneurship. And the design of the course was, how do you think about technology and technology trends, and how do you apply technology in the context of a corporation? And most importantly, how do you, as a individual actor in a job, in a role, in a company, actually imbibe startup practices, and how does that allow you to be more creative and really think outside the box. And so while I was teaching this course, I sort of reflected a little bit on my career. And, if you look at my, my LinkedIn, you can see that about every 8 years, I made a technology shift in my career or something that I was doing. And all of these were sort of technology shifts looking at, well, what was the next thing that I wanted to do? Coincidentally, they were also like the next waves of technology or pretty early on in the next waves of technology. So our mobile journeys basically overlapped through the 2000s. I actually did a hard pivot that left Microsoft in early 2000 to do a hard pivot into mobile and wireless, and effectively spent the next 14 years approximately in different roles in mobile and wireless, whether it was large enterprises like Goldman Sachs or IBM, or whether it was startups in the wireless and mobile space. And this is actually what led me into cloud, and how I sort of got back at Microsoft. But what happened that sort of brought me on this discovery of blockchain was, thinking about innovation, technology trends, and seeing what was, I guess similar to you, sort of popping up in your feeds that was interesting to you. And I started seeing old terminology from my computer science days that were, foundational technologies in blockchain. Didn't realize when I started reading about it that it was blockchain until, I went on that journey. I basically spent enough time thinking about this innovation wave, applying new technologies, and was sort of awake at the moment that I discovered blockchain, that there was a wave, right? There's an opportunity for another wave, both in my career, but also in the context of digital transformation opportunities in our societies. And so this really infused a desire for me to prove to myself what has to be true, right? For myself, for this technology to actually be what I really think it is based on what I'm reading. And so that took me on a reading journey of about 6 months, almost full time on top of my day job. And emerged from that basically convinced that digital uniqueness, as the most succinct 2 words that I can use to describe blockchain, is actually possible in a way that it was never possible for me in my technology career, no matter what the technology was that I used before. And so this was the unlock, right? That sort of hooked me, right? And then, that caused me to then obviously relook at what I was teaching in my class and say, okay, so now what do I do, right? I've either got to go on this journey somewhere, or I could even look at my enterprise and take what I was actually teaching in my entrepreneurship class and say, how do I now really have this opportunity at Microsoft to go practice what I've been preaching, and go sort of conquer this enterprise from a digital transformation perspective with a new technology.
And so what were some of those things that you learned about blockchain and Ethereum that convinced you that there might be a wave there?
It was really sort of the reframing of siloed systems into open systems, which certainly coincident with open source technology stacks and the embrace of that even at large enterprises like Microsoft, with these qualities of what's typically usually a very simplistic invention that is a combination of existing technologies in a way that no one's ever thought of before to create something uniquely new, right? To me, that was a foundation upon which you could build this uniquely new thing without risk. Then secondly, as I looked at the people in the space, particularly in the Ethereum space, who I was meeting, my conclusion was these are the smartest people in computer science that I have worked with, probably in my career. And so that, those couple of things hooked together really just convinced me that, there's something here that's quite unique.
I've always believed in chasing the smarter people. So probably leading you in the right direction. And so that explains sort of how you got to where you are and why you're excited. What does Microsoft do with blockchain? What is your involvement with Ethereum?
Yeah, so we started our journey basically the end of 2015, after myself and another colleague had this epiphany and decided to go on this journey and figure out how to actually, get Microsoft to start doing things that were relevant. The first thing we landed on, actually in collaboration with Consensus, was doing developer tooling, right, and introducing the enterprise, at the time, what was mostly enterprise Visual Studio users, into the world of blockchain through extensions, essentially, right? This actually wound up on the front page of CoinDesk, as Microsoft's developer community is being lit up with blockchain capabilities. So that was really pretty easy thesis, right? Where you could say, here's a new technology, let's make it accessible, right, to a new audience. I think we've been relatively successful with that. We've been on, as of, it's really 4 years, right, plus since we've been on that journey. And we actually shipped that product as an extension, well before we had an engineering team, which is also an interesting data point on an entrepreneurship journey. So then, from there, then we crafted what would be the types of services in Azure cloud that would be added value, right, to blockchain stacks, and how do we think about what we've done in other open source technologies. For example, you could look at the patterns in Azure MySQL and Azure Postgres and Azure Key Vault and Azure Kubernetes, right, as technologies that are effectively open source technologies that have been embraced from a cloud services perspective so that you could create a scalable offering. And so we, basically had this thesis that would be interesting, right, for technologies in the blockchain space. In addition to the amazing partner work that we've done over these years with partners who are publishing their own products into the Azure Marketplace to make them available. And there's an interesting angle here, because this is actually the sort of partner journey angle that generally Microsoft does, right? It's like provide some infrastructure capability so that enterprises and partners can build technical foundational technologies. I often call them Lego blocks because, internally we're really good at shipping Lego blocks and we haven't been necessarily great at shipping solutions, right, on top of those Lego blocks, aside from, core productivity applications like Office and Dynamics and Teams and things like that. But really making these technologies much more accessible, infusing great open source technology innovation with enterprise customers, and creating the platform, technically marketplace, right, where they can meet and actually transact in a way that is seamless and actually overcome some of the contracting hurdles that small startups would typically have, right, when trying to go to market with enterprises. So that is a product called Azure Blockchain Service. We have a number of other things around that, as a sort of core service offering. And then, there's a whole nother fork of this blockchain thread, which now sits in our identity engineering team, which Ruben and others know well, which is the Decentralized Identity Foundation work around open source decentralized identities rooted in public blockchains like Ethereum or Bitcoin or others. As a foundational shift in how we think about identity and identity federation.
I'm really excited as an observer on the decentralized identity piece to see how that's evolving and what will come out of that.
Yeah, I think it's another sort of what I would call a new pattern. You could also call it a silo anti-pattern, right? Like it's really a reframing of not just technology stacks, but also how we authenticate into technology stacks, which is quite fascinating.
So this feels like a good moment just to answer one of the first questions in the chat. Yorke, you described Microsoft's strategy, which is one we've seen in action, of increasing accessibility for these new tools. The developer accessibility, the Azure Marketplace makes it a lot easier for developers within enterprise contracts to spin up networks and move forward and so forth. What is the biggest problem you see your users solving with enterprise Ethereum today? Like, how are people using it?
Oh, yes. I think it's interesting. I was having a conversation earlier this morning of what is a use case, right, versus what's a pattern versus what's an area of applicability or an industry. And so, we see many, many different types of use cases. A lot of it has to do with, what you would often call, a root of trust, or basically a trust framework, right? So that you can actually have, full validation that something was the way people said it was at a point in time, right? We certainly see this in, the coronavirus data tracking, right? Where it's very easy to modify the data on a website, and that's been demonstrated by various governments around the world, right? So it would be interesting to be able to capture that in a way that's locked in time, so that you have a reference back to authenticated, data or authentic data. And you could look at a data provenance and a data change provenance. And a lot of that pattern right there, right? The data change provenance or state change provenance is one of the key ways that people look at blockchain, whether it's in the enterprise or the public environment. And so, that could be supply chains, right? Where you're tracking the state of goods in a supply chain, and state, can mean all different types of things, like who has custody of the goods, has the value changed of those goods, what's the quality of those goods, et cetera, right? So we see a lot in supply chain, obviously, because tracking state of goods is important, no matter the type of good, whether it's a hard good like electronics components, or whether it's lettuce and apples and mangoes, right? And then, I think in the context of humanitarian sector, the data is one angle, right, of that. Certainly, decentralized identity has a huge import in that sector. I think transparency is another key aspect, particularly if you think about donations. The work that UNICEF is doing, right, with their crypto fund is all about transparency, right? How do I ensure that my donors can have transparency, multiple legs down the chain of how their donations being used in projects in the field? And so, that's just a sort of important part of that. What have you been seeing?
So, I completely agree that discerning between patterns and use cases is a little tough, but the language I use to describe the key pattern that I'm seeing is counterparty risk, which is just a way of framing and putting a dollar sign on trust. So any industry where counterparty risk matters and is highly sensitive, blockchain has the ability to reduce that counterparty risk by reducing the administration risk of one counterparty running the network, by enforcing in a remote way that people are doing and using information in the way they said, and is what you also already mentioned, Yorke, that data is what it was at a certain time. Obviously, you're never going to eliminate real-world fraud. The data is only as good as the data on the network, but it's a huge step forward in terms of minimizing counterparty risk. And so we're seeing that pattern applied to a number of different verticals. For us, by far the biggest vertical is financial services, where it's really a lot easier to quantify counterparty risk. We're starting to see lots of different exchanges, commodities exchange, capital markets exchanges come on, even exchanging of currency and assets. And so that's something that I expect to continue to grow. And as the technology becomes easier to deploy, the number of use cases where the math works out, it's sort of cost effective to run these sort of networks will only increase.
Yeah, and actually, it's interesting. Counterparty risk comes up very frequently in supply chain, right, with supply chain finance, and so it is also a very common pattern. That's quite accurate. I totally agree with that. Yeah,
and it's in the nonprofit sector as well. That how do I know people are using the money the way they say they're using the money? Right. So if you can bring transparency, you're reducing the risk there in some sense. Anyway. So just
by the way,
wondering the time.
As an anti-pattern, by the way, no, I cannot answer the the proof of work concept that harnesses body data movement. I don't have any insights into that aside from what's been in the press. So, people can write patents all the time, right? Whether that is meaningful or not, is another question.
So, just being mindful of time, why are Microsoft and Consensus partnering, and what's sort of the goal of the partnership? Yeah,
so I mean, we look at I would call it moment in time levers about partnerships generally, right, from a technology perspective, right? So, as you look at particular ecosystems, what are the relevant parties to be close to, and, what does that mean? So, we had that, very fortunate opportunity to meet Joe Lubin and the, 4 or 5 other employees of ConsenSys in 2015, and really get a very good understanding of, the ConsenSys perspective on blockchain technology, and obviously particular the roadmap of Ethereum, and so, seeing that play out, it's it's an important aspect of the industry, and sort of going again to Microsoft's partner and developer friendly viewpoint of the success of an ecosystem. You need the right partners, and those partners are combinations of great large partners like systems integrators, whether that's Accenture, KPMG, EY, etc., or smaller boutique organizations that are either building product or might be consulting, right, in the space. And so we have a range of partner programs that very specifically have formal programs associated with those partnerships, and then typically they're backed up by in a particular area deep engineering engagement. And so, as I mentioned, we've been having deep engineering engagement essentially in the entire journey with ConsenSys. So, developer ecosystem is always been, going back to the founding days of Microsoft, an important lens at how you look at market success, right? And so, ConsenSys plays a key role, right, in the Ethereum ecosystem, based on the various products that have been incubated, whether product in the product suite today, or incubated and spun out, or what have you, or invested. So clearly there's an important relationship there. Like there's an important relationship with other infrastructure players in the space. And I'll give you a great example of one that's more up the stack. Is Splunk, right? I mean, Splunk's actually got some amazing technology, which they've been able to demonstrate, right, in some pretty cool ways, but also has, real applicability in the enterprise health space, right? When I say health, I mean health of technology platforms, right? So what, I know there's, one of the ways that we sort of, reflect on ecosystems that are successful is as I mentioned, developer audience. I know you guys have some you track this quite carefully, right? So part of our collaboration around developer audience is quite important. But what are you seeing from a data points perspective there?
Yeah, absolutely. So completely agree with what John Packle put in the chat. Developers. If you can win the mind share of the developers, they'll go and do great things with the technology, and that's something that both ConsenSys and Microsoft believe deeply. So in terms of some numbers, we're seeing continued strong growth in daily and monthly active users for MetaMask. MetaMask is over 200,000 monthly active users. The protocol suite that I lead, we now have over 130,000 downloads of our Besu and PegaSys Plus node software, which is pretty exciting.
Yeah, that's a number.
We've seen a lot of data estimating the size of the Ethereum developer community relative to others. So it ranges, but the latest numbers I've seen are sort of 20 to 30x the size of the Ethereum's community compared to any other blockchain community out there. So one of the reasons we're so gung-ho on Ethereum as a technology base is the developer community and the adoption, experimentation, innovation, all that can drive.
That's great. Yeah, and I mean, it's certainly a metric that we look at as we look at the ongoing work we've been doing in the blockchain developer kit that we're going to talk about today as well. So.
Yeah, maybe this is a great segue for you to tell us a little bit about the blockchain developer kit.
Yes, and so I saw the quote developers with like you can certainly find the sweaty Steve Ballmer on any stage during his Microsoft tenure doing that speech. I was actually quite fortunate to not be at Microsoft for very long in the 2000s. So although I worked under all three CEOs, which is kind of interesting, I didn't spend much time under Ballmer as a CEO. But so we've been, as I mentioned, we've started this developer journey focused on a Visual Studio enterprise extension, which is in the Visual Studio marketplace. And then VS Code grew up as this open source, cross-platform developer tooling, and got just amazing adoption in the market because of the utility of and the capabilities of the product. And so we've been continuing to hone our blockchain developer kit, but we've been focused on the VS Code side of the equation. And so we have we work very closely with a lot of the tooling that exists in the marketplace, whether it's wallets or things like Truffle or Infura, obviously now Hyperledger Besu and PegaSys. And even interesting libraries and capabilities like OpenZeppelin and others, and try to really, from a developer experience, create a encompassing experience that allows the developer not to have to context switch when every step of what they're doing, right? So context switching obviously is inefficient, right, for our brains. And so trying to give people the tooling, both for new developers of blockchain, as well as for experienced developers of blockchain, such that you can have a great, efficient experience, whether you're targeting a Besu network on Azure or Azure Blockchain Service or Infura or your own infrastructure, right? And so what we've done in the latest release of the Blockchain Developer Kit is we've been very deliberate to focus on a broad audience of users, particularly the open source Ethereum community, and then walk you through that experience from a tooling perspective. And you can find this in the Visual Studio Code Marketplace, published by Microsoft. It's called the Blockchain Dev Kit for Ethereum, and then has about 4 different sort of target areas underneath the framing, which is what if I'm an Azure customer and I'm working with Azure Blockchain Service, or generally an Azure blockchain customer, and I'm working with any stack, including the PegaSys stack. What do I have to do, right? So there's some instructions for Azure users. There's instructions for people who just want to work with Truffle boxes and all the capabilities of Truffle. There's instructions for people who are coming at it from the frame of being a Hyperledger Besu user and wanting to adopt this, this tooling. And so, we continue to invest in this because, creating great developer experiences, absolutely, is part of the journey of getting developers to adopt technology. So we're very excited.
Yeah, and I'd encourage anyone in the audience to go check it out, the Blockchain Developer Toolkit. It really is a fantastic way to get started across those technologies. And thank you, John, for posting a link to what we're talking about. I hope that's the right link. So that's not all that Consensus and Microsoft are doing together, right? There's also a bit of work around the Azure Marketplace. So maybe you can just give us a little bit of an overview on that and how that might work for developers and enterprises.
I'm sorry, I apologize. I missed that. I was just making sure that link was correct. I don't think it is. So let me just drop the correct one in there.
All right. Well, while you find the link, I'll give the overview of our partnership. So as I've said a number of times, there's many reasons I love working with Microsoft, and it's their sort of laser focus on adoption and making the developer journey easy that I think separates Microsoft's approach to Ethereum from others potentially at the moment. And so one other thing we've launched today officially is our Azure Marketplace templates for Hyperledger Besu.
Yep.
And so it's designed to make it easy for developers and dApp developers for mainnet or enterprise developers for private chain to have a real network up in 5 minutes that you can start testing against. You can test directly from your IDE. You get all the features that Besu has sort of directly in Azure Marketplace, and that'll be updated as new versions and features are released. And so for us, it's just another step on that journey of making it as easy as possible for people to get started on the Ethereum stack that we've built.
Yes, and this is exactly the point, right, of the marketplace offerings, is to connect together both experienced users who want to use cloud infrastructure with non-experienced blockchain users who want to actually start to go down the blockchain road. If you combine together the stack, if you combine together the stack, with the developer tooling, then you've got actually quite a bit, right? So yeah, we're very excited about the ongoing journey, and the looking forward to the continued releases of Besu and PegaSys in the Azure marketplace.
Yeah, and from our perspective, this is just another step on that journey. There's a lot more we're looking forward to doing together, making it easier for businesses to start consortium networks and join existing ones, making it easier to have multi-region networks, and just general things that developers want to be able to do easily. And then sort of in the back of our minds, of course, is Ethereum 2 and collaboration that might be coming around that. So that's the perfect segue to the next question here, which is, there's a lot of coverage going on right now on Ethereum 2.0. What role is Microsoft looking to play in this evolution?
So, I mean, this is actually one of the great things I think about the partnership with the PegaSys team is, knowing your focus on the next wave of, this innovative technology gives us an ability to have a seat, very directly with our partner at the table of understanding that journey. And so, as the stacks continue to, get to maturity and the capabilities continue to get to maturity, then we'll actually have, a front row seat on being able to put those into play, right, through our partnership. And I think that's, exactly where we want to be. I think I would say one of the most fascinating things about where blockchain is right now is this sort of move towards proof of stake models, which obviously is, Ethereum 2.0 and many other blockchains that are out there. And, this is really what I would call sort of the middle ground in blockchain architecture between what we call, private enterprise implementations of, essentially proof of authority networks with a public implementation where it's, completely unknown who the actors are, right? And so there's some really interesting opportunities with proof of stake, I think, and it's definitely something that as this, technology wave continues, we need to stay close to. And so, it's one of the things that we're actually banking on with the PegaSys relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. And there have been a number of great talks given on ETH2 so far today. Two of the talks were presented by product leaders within our protocol division here. So Tim Biko and Ben Eddington have spoken to that. Tim is a product owner on our ETH1 team that's also looking into how to turn ETH1 into a stateless environment that can run on ETH2. And Ben is our product lead for our ETH2 efforts on PegaSys Teku. So, cool.
Yeah, we're excited about the work you guys are doing there. So, so that we can, continue to learn from your abilities, right? I mean, as you think that like a large enterprise like Microsoft or any other large enterprise is just, dripping with free resources, right? But the enterprises are typically large because they've been tasked with doing something, right? And so we definitely, especially in the advanced technology space, we need to rely on partners who are really, really skilled, in those categories. And so again, the consensus and PegaSys relationship is exactly in that wheelhouse when you think about that.
Awesome. Well, we're looking forward to partnering for many years to come on that. So we're close out of time, but there's a couple other good questions in here. So I'm going to jump around in order. Yorke, do you think you could answer this one? So does Microsoft plan to use blockchain in its own business management activities? For example, with Microsoft Certified Professional Program. For me, one of the most interesting use cases is what you're doing internally with Microsoft. I'm not sure what you're able to speak to.
Yeah, there's both public case studies of internal usage of blockchain at Microsoft, And then there's also, work going on that I probably don't even know about, right? And so, there's, obviously there's the blockchain engineering team that has a core focus on blockchain technology, but I think personally more interesting is how is a Microsoft line of business using blockchain technology, or even how is another business, right, that's not the blockchain engineering team using blockchain technology to infuse blockchain characteristics and qualities into their products. And so, we see this in a number of places. As I said, most of it is not public, so I don't want to talk about those here necessarily, but we have done some testing in our supply chain, particularly on the devices side, actually over the last couple of years, where we're looking at unique item identities and the provenance and the state of those identities or those items. It's one example. That was sort of a fusing of IoT with blockchain, very specifically looking at IoT event series data from RFID chips, which are used for tracking goods in the supply chain. And then, having a blockchain record essentially of the state changes of that, of that. And that's a pattern I think that is a very common pattern for any asset, where, I like, for example, if you look at energy, right, and what's going on with the Paris Accords and, even some of the regulations around usage of green energy, how do you prove that green energy was used in your business in a particular building? It's actually quite hard to do today. And so if you think about green energy as effectively a provably green kilowatt hour, then you can actually create provably green kilowatt hours from an IoT device, which then allows you to have essentially a pure green asset that you can prove the whole provenance and history of where it was consumed or even where it was sold to. And so the person who sold it to can also prove where it was produced, right? And that it is actually green, right? And this is a massive upgrade in terms of what we do today in terms of carbon credits, where it's very like audit oriented and nebulous. You could have a green energy contract with conservation energy, but what ability do you have to go and actually prove that what you're consuming came from a green source, right? As an example. So that is the exact type of thing that we look at, right? And when we're looking at our business. And I think also importantly, just another quick sort of vector on that is we often look at Microsoft's line of businesses as an incubation opportunity to prove something that then we can take to customers, right? And so if you look at all of the work that we're doing in the sustainability space, that's exactly what it is, right? How does Microsoft apply solutions in the green energy or other sustainability space? And then how do we inform and enable all of our enterprise customers and peers in different markets to actually go adopt those same technical approaches? So just the one case study that's out there, by the way, is the Xbox royalties case study. It's on the website, so you can very, very easily go find information about it.
Definitely go check that out. It's one of my favorite use cases. And so 2 final questions. So one is, what's the best way for one to enter the space as a career launch?
Well, it depends. I would say that depends on what your passions are and, what's your area of, I'll use your area of expertise, right? And like the legal market right now is flush, right? There's a lot of people doing work in the blockchain context in legal because of the reframing of assets, right? As an example, right? And so there's interesting audit firms like EY and KPMG, right, who are doing advanced work in blockchain because of the opportunity for reframing audit. And how they work from a risk perspective and with their customers. So those are consultancies, right? And they have a specific area of expertise, but yet there's a value proposition from a blockchain perspective. Obviously, I think if you're a developer, it's fairly easy. There's a number of developer boot camps, including Consensus Academy and a bunch of others to get various different people up to speed. The nice thing about Ethereum is it's a full stack approach. You don't have to be a core hardcore cryptographer, right, in order to actually understand what's going on. Obviously, it helps, but you can build great applications at the application layer on top of this new interesting infrastructure. So you can be a front-end dev, you can be a UX designer, you can be and by the way, we need a lot of UX design in this space. There's a lot of, it's often, when I talk to developer teams, they have no idea what a persona is, which, is kind of a problem. And particularly when you're dealing with complex technologies, UX is really important. So I don't know, I covered a couple of different areas. I think there's, it does, any new technology takes a passion. And you also have to have a mindset of being a discoverer and a curious discoverer for any new technology. And that is the sort of your unlock. And then it is just, what are the resources I go to find, right?
Yeah. So I'll add it in 30 seconds. Some of the best advice I ever received when I was still in college is think through what sort of day-to-day experience you want, because life in the blockchain space or life in fashion or life in finance or whatever can look wildly different from one job to another, even within the same industry. So do you want to be speaking to people all day? Do you want to be project managing and making sure things are delivered on time? Do you want to be in Excel doing financial models? What do you like doing? And then figure out how you can bring those skills to the specific vertical. And so with that final question, Yorke, as we close, so what's one thing you think the audience should do having heard this talk? What should the takeaways be?
Well, I love that point. And I sort of sidestepped into a point that I always mentor people on, which is in order to do anything new or to actually stay interested, and this is something we look at, the learning journey of infants. Why can they learn the way they learn? It's because they're curious about everything, right? And so I always say, be curious, right? That is absolutely the key to success, at least in my perspective. And secondly, obviously we would love for you to go exercise the Besu suite and the PegaSys suite that's on the Azure Marketplace. If that's your thing, and we would love for you to give us feedback there, and we'd love for you to give us feedback on the Blockchain Developer Kit. So you can go download it today; it's available, and you can leave us comments directly there, or obviously find us through various channels.
Yeah, absolutely. And just doubling down on that, we would love for everyone in the audience to go mess around with the quick start, kick the tires, let us know what you think. Build on top of it and give us some feedback.
Great.
Well, Yorke, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
It has been a pleasure, always a pleasure, Dan. And I'm sure we'll be speaking soon. I'm going to drop the link to the Azure Marketplace in here for the quick start.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, have a great rest of the day, everyone. Ethereal has some great talks coming up, so be sure to tune in for the rest.
Thanks, everyone.